Bioneers, it's my people. This is where I feel it's the birthplace. It really is a joining of the midwives, the ideas, the ingenuity, the creativity, the sparks of inspiration. Bioneers brings all of these visions and all of this action together.
There's nothing that's off the table here. It's all possible, and it's all connected, and it's so liberating.
Welcome to Free Speech TV. My name is Carl Nagin, and we're here with our ongoing coverage of the 2019 Bioneers Conference. My guest today is Severine Fleming. She is a farm activist and founder of Greenhorns, director of Greenhorns. It's an organization whose mission is to promote, support, and recruit young farmers in America. And this 10-year-old grassroots collective is based in Pembroke, Maine. She's also co-founder of the National Young Farmers Coalition and a leading voice in promoting green farming. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Okay, so let's hear a little bit, Severine, about what it is in your life path that made you want to be a farmer and take this journey, which is not an easy one.
It's where there's a will, there's a way. And mine is very simple. I grew up going to a farm in the summer with my family, and I loved cows and I loved flowers, and I wanted to be around them. And I think a lot of people, if they trace back to the seed of what got them into agriculture, it is love of animals and plants and being outside, and often early childhood experiences. But Greenhorns got started basically to inquire, in the form of making a film, to inquire, is a young farmers movement coming? You know, do we have the people that it will take to reform our agricultural system? You know, who are these people? What are they doing? How are they approaching this work? Are they going to succeed? And so I'd say it started as a kind of an anthropology project. I was still in school. And the film was kind of the product of that work, of that learning, yeah.
Because you've managed to wed together both farming and a lot of media activity. Can you describe, just most of our audience may not know about Greenhorn, so
yeah, we started in 2008, which is the year of the iPhone. So we were quick to be, you know, social media kids, and we went and we used all the tools that we had and the free software that proliferated in that time. So we started with film, and then we got into radio and podcasting. So we did, 9 years of podcasts every week. We were blogging, we were making events, we were doing workshops, we made festivals, we published books, we published guidebooks, we made posters, we made stickers, whatever we could make to hold the stories and the community and make a welcoming place for young people in agriculture.
Including a new version of Farmers Almanac.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
The new Farmers Almanac is coming into our 5th edition, and actually that edition is called the Farmers New Deal. So we challenge our writers to look around the landscape and describe what could be possible in terms of restoration. PTA, Fire Council, Transportation Department, public lands, state lands, that there's so much opportunity for what a Green New Deal could be. And as farmers, we're used to looking at land and making lists and getting it done. So as a repository for a public imaginary, the almanac is a good form. The other almanacs have had other themes. The last one was on the commons. Then we had one, each one has different chapters. And the farmers who contribute, of which there were 100 in the last almanac, it's 400 pages long. It's a literary journal.
It's not that little thin one anymore. It's
well, that was the littlest little guidebook.
Yeah.
Really basic stuff. We realized we need to interpret for young people how to find a job in agriculture. Make sure you're wearing boots in your interview. Make sure you take care of your body and drink lots of water. And here's what the labor laws are. And there's a basic project of accompanying these bodies who we cherish into this work, which is so critical, which our economy and our society undervalue.
When you talk about reforming agriculture, what specific things do you have in mind?
Well, our operating system is agroecology. So the people who are in our community, which is about 70,000 people in our
Wow.
kind of network, are people focused on agroecology. So that means diversity on the landscape. It means rotations. It means care of the soil using organic methods, compost you might have heard about, and also bringing more animals, bringing more perennials, moving into a more complex, still domesticated, but a more complex ecology on the land. And that requires initiative, it requires sentience, it requires care, and it requires people. So we know that that so much work is to be done in restoring and repairing the life of the soil, the health of the soil, the health of the water that flows through that soil into our rivers, into our drinking systems. But of course, to enact that work is humans. So there's also work to support those humans getting into a position to do that healing. And that's defined our approach, is following those humans and having a place for a literary journal and helping people get on their first job, and and then like a slalom to overcome all the challenges
And obstacles.
One
of the big obstacles to this kind of farming, particularly for young people, is owning land, purchasing land. That's true both in urban farming and in rural farming. So you're part of something, or you started something called the Agrarian Trust. Could you talk about that to help address that problem?
Well, in the surveys that are done, asking young people who are in agriculture, what are your biggest blockages? Land access to capital, and student loan debt are the top three. So it's not that we don't have the will or the skills, because there actually are great training programs and amazing apprenticeship opportunities all over the country. So learning how to farm is actually a good path. We've got that organized for ourselves as a movement of organic agriculture. The land part is very challenging, and actually the land that is already organically farmed, today's organic farms, precious territory of resilience and food security for the communities that eat from that land, is imperiled by the lack of succession planning, estate planning, and frankly, the amount of money that land is worth makes it challenging for that business, that farm operation, to be passed either to the kids or to not kids of that family, but other kids.
Right.
And so, all around the country, if you have any relatives or friends or families, or you're in any kind of a community, you're probably aware of this demographic moment we're in, where the wealth and the land is owned by people who are, not as young as they were. And there's incredible synergy that can come from working intergenerationally on a problem like that.
Yes.
We're young and we can scamper up a stool and change a light bulb, and we can be helpful if we work together with energy to move fences and fix up sheds and, refurbish barns and make more housing on the land to accommodate more bodies. And it's that synergism that gave birth to the Agrarian Trust. How do we do this as a together project? Because it's quite lonely on both sides of the land access problem. And how do we involve not only that intergenerational, but also a whole larger community of people who are co-investors in the succession of that farm business, and even more, which is potentially more enterprises on that farm. Field edges and orchards, bees, mushrooms, agroforestry, silvopasture, more different animal operations rotating through, maybe a U-pick, maybe a farm stand, so that there's actually more opportunity on these farms if there's more people.
To build a bigger community.
To build a bigger, more dense set of relationships, ecologically, socially, economically. So the Agrarian Trust grew out of that inquiry and is also a project in kind of public land reform. So the land that is coming into the trust, and we have 7 parcels that are all organized, all the lease agreements and the transfer agreements. So we're about to flip on our fundraising switch to get all those deals done for the first 7 parcels. And the majority of the value in those parcels was donated as a land gift. But that land will no longer be private property. It will be held by a community trust. So we're an outgrowth of the community land trust movement, and we've been helped along the way with wonderful cooperative lawyers in Oakland, to create governance structures that are informed by Eleanor Ostrom's work on governing the commons, which is a little bit different from the normal, land trusts, because we'd like to keep moving the farm forward.
Is this only in rural settings, or do you have any in urban settings? You mentioned Oakland.
Well, we have when we have our kind of matrix of what we're looking to do, and we're really looking for good habitat for community food sovereignty. So, super remote places that aren't as good for, training young people, or that aren't as good habitat would be less interesting than places that are dense. Yeah. Of course, closer to the city, the land values are much higher.
Right.
So I think the answer is yes, and some of the farms that are in the early, this early group are really well-respected training farms, because that's such a, the kinds of farms that every season are churning out, 3 more young farmers that are on their path and have done the work to be.
Where are these training? This is very interesting. I haven't heard about this before. Where are these training farms?
Oh, well, there's training farms all around the country. There's a great list that's maintained by our United States tax dollars. It's the Appropriate Technology Transfer for Rural Areas, atra.gov, is a wonderful resource on alternative farming practices, and they host this list of all the apprentice training programs. And then Greenhorns, we also have lists and a digital map of apprentice farms and agricultural land trusts and agrarian lawyers and sustainable ag research programs and sustainable ag graduate programs. So, once you start burrowing in, one of the benefits of living in a digital age is we are able to really compile all this information for people, and it's way easier to navigate than it was, 10 years or 20 years ago.
That's great. What are some of the other coalitions and projects that you've launched to support young farmers?
Well, we talked about student loan debt.
Right.
And that's not just an issue for young farmers, that's an issue for my whole generation.
Right.
And the National Young Farmers Coalition, which now has 44 chapters around the country, and has staff in Washington to lobby for our interests and these policy structures that shape the farm economy to our detriment, are very actively lobbying for passage of the public service agreement. So basically, rural nurses and firefighters and teachers already get debt relief because it's understood that that's public service work. And so our argument is that young people entering agriculture, which I wish it weren't the case, but it is a pretty spiritual decision, because you're consenting to work in a sector that does not pay its producers well. It does not, just like teachers and doctors. So if you're making that choice and then you're trying to pay off a whole bunch of student loan debt, it's very challenging. So if anyone is listening or watching and they're trying to figure out, well, where do I plug in and where do I meet my community of young farmers, the National Young Farmers Coalition chapters are a great place to start.
That's fantastic. That's great. So discuss some of the impacts of your work that you've seen in the 10 years that you've been doing this. Extraordinary. What are you most proud of and see as the most beneficial?
Well, it's working. I mean, there are people and go on farm tour and experience, thriving, and beautiful young children, living beautiful, happy lives, well nourished, and families and networks of kinship that are nourishing to those communities. I think one of the biggest accomplishments of the Young Farmers Movement is our level of kinship and kindness to one another. It really is a team sport, and we work well together. Like, people cooperate and are sharing information well, fluidly transferring information about what opportunities live in, our valley. Wow, we really, we need a pork producer in this valley. There's a market for that. Oh, I know who's got some land that could be, available for pasture. Oh, have you been to that conference? That, and that level of reciprocal kindness
and collaboration
is actually totally critical and because we are this kind of minority understory, you know, and we're all farming next to conventionally farming neighbors. You know, we're all trying to cobble together equipment, you know, to do that and prop up, you know, old buildings and fix it up and figure it out. And so because there's quite a lot of adversity and challenge to the work of, you know, starting and running a farm business, it forces you to really humble down and lean in and work together.
That's great.
That's fun.
I'll bet. That's terrific. So I'm going to ask you a question I've been asking a lot of the people for this segment is, if you could imagine a new Green Deal, what would be some of your priorities in that new Green Deal that pertain particularly to farming and young farmers?
Well, of course, changing some of these terrible policies that incentivize all the wrong things, overproduction of crops that then are overinsured and fail, you know, these blankets of monocultures that destroy creeks and riparian areas across our big bread basins.
Right.
You know, incentives for the kinds of farming practices that we want, like cover cropping, like hedgerows, like polycultures, like orchard, you know, all of the conservation tillage that we saw in the 1930s is a very powerful metaphor for what clear government policy can yield on the landscape. You know, then you expand it out and you think, wow, you know, if we could run nurseries for native plant restoration and be working in the uplands and be, you know, restoring hydrology in flood-prone areas and doing, you know, preparatory burn work in, you know, fire-prone areas and thinking ahead of the crisis that is, yes, accelerated by climate change, but caused by urbanization and the engineering of the landscape.
Right, and also big ag and excessive cattle farming.
And mining and, you know, terrible forestry practices. So there's plenty to do on the ground. And I guess my hope in the Green New Deal is that there are great jobs in restoration.
Wonderful.
Great, wonderful jobs in rural areas doing this critical work.
Severine, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about your work and what you're doing and where your sort of future goals are?
Well, we run an awesome summer camp in Maine.
Ooh.
And we have our headquarters in our agrarian library there. So people who are thinking about exploring northern New England can come and find us there all summer long, fun workshops. The other part I would say is if people are interested in tools, like farm tools, hardware, software, all of the equipment that it takes to run these complex farms, we have a fun public resource, open source community of tools that is called farmhack.org. And we always are looking and happy to share all of that kind of co-inspiration.
Mm-hmm.
And then also the almanac, the next issue is coming.
All right. And
So
how do we
join
get
a
a copy of it?
coalition. Yeah, you join a coalition, write and think with us. Read the blog, participate. And if you're not a young farmer but you're an eater and you don't know any young farmers, go find some to know. And listen and tune in to what that community needs, like who we are and what we're doing and how to participate along with us, because there's actually a tremendous time for collaborating.
Severine Fleming, thank you so much for being with us on Free Speech TV.
Thank
it's
you.
a pleasure to talk with you.
Very kind of you.
Thank you.